The dynamics of a tribe are likely the most influential aspects of our lives, if you think about it. We often discuss nutrition in terms of what our bodies require, but rarely consider something we could call tribal nutrition, what our minds need. In fact, it's probably even more crucial than nutrition alone. Our core tribal um, instincts, tendencies, requirements shape us more than any other factor. In fact, it is the basis of things like religion, if you think about it. Religions are essentially tribal reunification layers. This is one of the main reasons why people of faith, for instance, tend to live up to 9 years longer than those who lack it. So some of the things that a tribe gives us from a, call it a nutrition standpoint, there's no right word for this, which is very shocking that something so important, we don't have a word to describe it. We have a word to describe nutrition for the body, but not nutrition from a tribe. And the way you can think of it is hormonal alignment that comes from tribal living. So here's some of the things that you get from a tribe. You get stress and nervous system regulation, right? You get oxytocin, which is the relatedness hormone. It's the closeness hormone, right? It's like hugging and touch, affection. You get hierarchy, which is extraordinarily important to humans. You get things like celebration, which is important for serotonin. Things like rites of passage, which alter your identity. You get moral lessons, basically passed down from what could be called cultural stories. Every tribe has that. You get passed down knowledge of methods and traditions and actually how to do things properly in the world. And probably the final thing is that you get rituals that everyone is loyal to. So those are again, this is that nutrition. All of us need that, and in modern society, we don't have almost any of this. There's no structures in place that provide this. We live in the post-tribal experiment, and it only really occurred, I would say, up until the last 40 to 60 years ago, because that's when religions and churches in the Western world started to be attended far less. Now, you can think that our solution when we entered civilization for the lack of tribal problem was to develop these decentralized religions that have places like churches or synagogues or mosques that we would go to, and we'd recreate tribal nutrition. So the whole, to me, the whole area of religion is an attempt to fix this problem. And again, we don't have a proper word to describe this need, right? I think people rope that up into the need for God, right? The God-shaped hole in people. We don't have a word for tribal nutrition, and that's as close as we get. So I just wanted to go over all of this and really dig into it and see where we can get these things, see what needs to be created. But I think we'll first start with, what do you guys think we've lost? Would probably be a great place to start. What in this current paradigm we lived in, how are we being affected by the complete loss of this? You got any thoughts there, Oliver or Daniel?
I mean, something that just came to mind while you were talking about a lot of this is how much even like the last dregs of some of these traditions, especially in the context of a yearly cycle, and even when like heavily mediated through consumerism, become really important to people. Like, people are so excited around Christmas time because they like get to participate in some sort of set of rituals. And I think about the fact that like there were over 100 feast days in medieval Europe, or like more than half of the days in Rome were various like days on which you couldn't do business for like all sorts of weird arcane reasons. There used to be this natural, omnipresent rhythm that recurred in different cycles around a lot of this stuff that was just part of people's lives, and it's been almost entirely eliminated. And there's a couple little bits of it throughout the year, and people just go wild for it. They're so starved. They're, yeah, incensed
That's
by it.
That's an incredible insight. And one, yes, they've been co-opted essentially by consumerism, which is sad on its own right. But you can also see what you described in terms of like sports teams and things like that. Why do you
Totally.
think why do you think this used to be so strong that we had this, like you said, 100 days out of the year were devoted to some sort of ritual or cycle or season or tradition, right? Why? How did we get to this place we are now? Bitcoiners will just say, "Oh, it's the fiat paradigm," but is it more complex than that? What do you think the reason is that we've lost these?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, it definitely, I think, has been exacerbated by the fiat paradigm, but I think it predates it a little bit. I don't, maybe not though. I don't know. This is something
It,
I've thought about too a lot. Just like not even just traditions, but there's like a uniformity that's been applied to life relatively recently that's like weird. Like I notice it every time I see things, even from like the 19th century, where like, then all of a sudden someone would need to travel. So even if they have like a very packed schedule, they're like a very important business person. It's like, and then they're gonna find themselves, like on a boat for 3 weeks. And like, there's not a lot to do on a boat except for like chill and socialize and maybe like read or like work on a book or something. Natural breaks, changes, natural like just like and the 40-hour work week plus 2 weeks of vacation a year, it gets like the amount of sameness is just way out of whack.
right.
And maybe that is just fiat. I don't know. It sort of like came about with planes and being able to travel quickly. And I don't know. It's hard.
Well,
I can't really pinpoint when that happened. It was also factory work.
that's what I was landing on. I think people attribute a lot to the fiat paradigm in 71 or really 1913 really changing all these things, but I actually believe an earlier version of the same sort of, I don't want to say corruption, but how it alters how we interact with reality was the Industrial Revolution. Like that was a dramatic change, and we go through a very specific way of living to working in factories in the city, and it was such a dramatic change. And we talked before about how that altered, if you think in terms of tribal roles, the providing that men used to do was high risk. And then the Industrial Revolution came along, and you're sitting there punching something, stamping something like a automaton for 8 hours, and it's removed the riskiness of male providing. And in that, the role, the we call it the benefits that men would get because they were the high risk takers of the tribe is no longer there. And so women are like, well, F you guys, we don't really value your contributions anymore. And then, fast forward that for a long period of time, and you have things like feminism. They're just like, well, we don't really care. We don't believe that you do high risk things anymore. So it neutered the ability of men to provide. So I think the Industrial Revolution probably is where this begins, this big degeneration, because everything you described there is pretty high technology, planes, travel, factory work. But how it exactly goes down, I'm not sure. Whether it just makes life miserable. And maybe that's why we get the Marxes of the world, and we get all these people that they comment on the drudgery of the modern type of work that occurred, and maybe that somehow affected it. But I don't know. That's probably not a question that's easily answered. So
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you've ever read any Marx, but his like criticism of the existing conditions is pretty spot on. He then goes off the rails, but like
right,
he's pointing out a very real problem. Um,
right, and then shortly thereafter, you see the propensity for unions, right? They get into this drudgery, standardized style of work, and then they attempt to recreate some form of a tribe through unions, and it becomes a very big tribe throughout the 20th century. Just an interesting observation, but
And people are
so that go for it,
people
Danny.
are still, there's a lot of desire for the benefits of a tribe. Like when you were earlier, something you said reminded me of. It just made me think of like the competition for, uh, some type of healthcare, like government provided healthcare or insurance provided healthcare. It's like you want the benefit of this support system, but the tribe is gone, and so you've got to recreate some kind of
Right.
tribe, whether it's a uh, medical sharing plan or a government medical care program or whatever to try and recreate the support system that you used to have through tribal connections.
Right. So it's all this incomplete, portioned off, distilled version of tribes and what they offered that we're living in now. I want to just pivot a bit to, so we're talking about what's been lost with tribes. The big one for me, and it became very clear through COVID, was tribes provide a lot of support for raising children. And that is largely gone. And that became very clear to me through COVID. So when you go through the list of the things I provided earlier, right, it provides, let me just go through the list here. Significant, or let me just see here. So the hierarchy, rites of passage, moral lessons from cultural stories, you know, the oxytocin, the rituals around closeness, getting together, stress and nervous system regulation, passed down knowledge of methods and tradition, rituals that everyone's loyal to. And then some of the more basket categories, it provides significance, solidarity, traditions, shared goals, share enemy, moral story, and stories that teach moral lessons. When you don't have this layer in place, children get none of this stuff. So they don't get any moral teaching. And then, well, what's in place of that in current society is public school. So you get, and these things are universal. If you're not going to have tribes and a culture that's there that was going to provide these things, then all these distilled, portioned off versions, like you talked about, will provide it. So without that, I feel like the most damaged demographic is children. What do you guys think about that?
I think just the way you framed that made me realize why some teachers are so righteous and indignant about their rights over the kids they teach. Because they really feel like they are the portion of the tribe that's passing down the tribal knowledge. And they've played by the tribe's rules and they've gotten into this position. And then parents come along and say, no, that's not actually the tribal knowledge we want you to pass down.
Right.
And it's like, it's like in a tribal context, someone decides to be like, they're not that great a hunter, but they decide to be a bard, which is, not everyone can be a bard, but it's a respected position. They get really good at it. And then all of a sudden someone comes along and says, fuck you. Like, I don't like any of your stories.
Oh, exactly.
And it's like, what the fuck? And the parents are like, well, but there are kids. Like, you're not part of my tribe. But for the teachers, it's like, no, we're part of this big tribe. Public school is how the tribe passes down its knowledge, and you're rejecting its knowledge.
Exactly. That's a great insight. So they have this, right? Because if you go back to a tribe, all the members are aligned. All like the aunts, and the uncles, and the friends, and everyone involved would be speaking into your child, teaching moral lessons, all involved, passing things down, and you wouldn't be like, no, you can't interact with him, or you can only interact with him. Like, that wouldn't happen. Everyone would be involved in it, and you wouldn't be worried about that. So you're right. That's what the teacher's going on. There's probably an instinct built around that's a role that they can take on, and it comes with certain responsibilities and certain rights and certain respect, right? And then parents saying, well, you're not in my tribe. So that's exactly it. I could see that being a major well, it is a major problem, but I can see why it would be that way for the teachers and why they think that way, because it's very bizarre how they perceive that they almost have ownership over the children. But we know the solution to that is, so what we're pointing out is that the public school system is this alien form of a tribe. It's this foreign territory. And if you put your kids there, expect a lot of this tribal machinery to get screwed up or to be exploited in a certain way.
Yeah, and actually, interestingly, if you think about it that way, there is precedence for sending your kids to other tribes or related tribes, but usually not until they already have a firm grounding in your tribe's moral compass. Like, you don't send your 5-year-old off to like the nobles in the next kingdom, but you might send your 14-year-old off to the nobles in the next kingdom. Because there's benefit in being exposed to different cultures, and to learning how to navigate that, and to understanding some of their perspectives on a fairly intimate level, and building connections. But if you do it from early on, then it's a disaster because you're just ceding the cultural territory entirely.
Yep, totally. Well, let's go into now the exact components that are lost, because this is where I think it's important. This is what I think about all the time. So in Sebastian Junger's book, which you know, called Tribes, what was the full name? I'll just get it here.
Yeah, I haven't read that in years, but I should probably reread it because I remember it being very short and very good.
Yeah, on homecoming and belonging. And one of the key things he talks about is a fundamental need for a sense of significance within a tribe. So let's see here. He notes that in traditional societies, individuals have clear roles and responsibilities within their communities, which gives them a sense of purpose and meaning. I mean, we've totally lost that. And that's what probably happened with the Industrial Revolution, right? You get disconnected from your community in terms of your production. You're part of this alien community of a factory, and then you kind of come back to your community. So that probably is what started the lack of significance feeling. That's probably what Marx was commenting on. And that's where we find ourselves now. We're in deeply in that. Well, we don't even have a home territory anymore that we leave to go work. So we're almost completely surrounded by and involved in a lot of different tribal hierarchies, like corporations or public schools. But the sense of significance is, I think, the underlying problem that everyone's facing, from depressed people to freaking school shooters to all this mental illness and aberrated behavior. In a lot of ways comes down to a complete lack of significance. And I've always thought that Viktor Frankl had a good commentary on what significance is. And he describes it through grief. I've mentioned this to you guys before, but it was so earth-shattering to me when he heard it. It's like, we don't grieve because, a loved one died who was important to us, like your mom died or something. You don't grieve because she was just important to you. The grieving process, biologically, is because you were important to them, right? You were significant to them. Like, there was something about your existence that they looked forward to and they gained value from. And when you take away people that you feel significant to, and you have no one, you mentally start falling apart. It's very difficult. And you can imagine the original tribe. You would step out your door or your teepee or your hut or whatever, and you would literally be surrounded by 50 people who, for the most part, find great usefulness to you, and you are important to them and have significance because of it. Right? Like that, it's that close. Within 50 yards, you're surrounded by 50 people who feel that way about you, and then now you live in this disconnected modern world where maybe you feel a little significance to your HR manager at work and the CEO doesn't notice you. It's a very disconnected world now where significance is very hard to come by. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's that just makes me think of experience living where I live, and just a variety of reactions from people. Like, say you move to a new neighborhood, a new area, and some people are welcoming, so you have some connection, but then there are other people who you have zero significance to, and it feels really strange to just be walking down the road and you walk past them, they're in their front yard or whatever, and they just don't acknowledge you. It's very odd. And so when you were talking about that difference, it just struck me, that experience. Like, I've had that a lot.
Yeah, that really lends a bit of depth for me on a concept you probably know from nutrition, right? They call diabetes, heart disease, diseases of civilization, right? You're mismatched from your design. And thinking of your tribal design, think of the extremely strange situation to be so proximally close to someone and them to totally ignore you. Like, that is a disease of civilization if there ever was one.
And in the past, you would either come upon people that you knew and you were significant to, or you come on people you didn't know, and then maybe you would have to fight. And now we just have this strange in between where you just ignore each other.
But yeah, even for the other people, you'd either fight or become, if not close, then friendly, right? There'd be a tense moment, and then it would resolve into like, yeah, we're all going to barter together, like, you know.
Yeah, the proper definition of acquaintance, right?
Yeah. And then either go our separate ways, or maybe this is like part of our tribes actually getting closer more seriously, but whatever. But the point is, it would never, this like perpetual state of being near people but having no connection to them doesn't exist in our evolutionary history.
Yeah, it's weird. So when it's James here, by the way, guys. When you were talking there, Daniel, about moving to a new place, I just got home, and I live in the downtown, in a big city, looking across the way, and there's a skyscraper across from me, and I see all these people milling around, and they don't know each other. They never have any interaction with each other, but I can see just how close they are, right? There's a 3-foot demising wall in between them. And it kind of got me thinking about like people en masse, the spirit of camaraderie exists in mass when you're at a sports event, because there's so many people who don't know each other, but there's a singular lens of focus on a single event. And that might be why, we talk a lot in the group about tribal hunting and the idea of like a group of guys bringing down the mammoth. No matter who was involved, even the person at the back who was barely involved, there's that singular nexus point that everyone's focused on. And maybe that's what's missing today with the complexity of society. No one has the same kind of singular focus in big groups.
That's an amazing insight. If you don't mind, I'm gonna add a bit to it and give, unfortunately, Marx a little bit more credit here. But you're talking about a society that had a very specific division of labor where everyone felt a part of it, right? You take down a mammoth, the hunters are one part of it, and then you have the people that process it, and then you have the people that cook it, right? Everyone in that enterprise would have felt a strong possession to whatever was the outcome of that. They would all feel the right to eat, right? So the division of labor was a very specific way. So we have all this machinery for a very group possessive sense of our involvement in these processes when it involves a bunch of people. It's like a tribal group possession. And then you get into capitalism, industrial revolution, and you get into the very distinct forms of division of labor that we have now. So you're a guy in the assembly line, you're punching stamping this thing every day. And then at the end of it, there's all this process, or there's all this profit that you, with this old tribal group possession machinery, say, well, hey, I was involved with the whole chain of events here. Don't I deserve a percentage of that? Or like a fair, no, you were this one and you're this replaceable in the process. So you are only paid at your replacement value. I'm sorry, little tribal man. And obviously that's going to like piss people off, right? And then they go form unions. So that's
and by the way, you're not actually part of my tribe, right? Like Marx was writing about like England and specifically what happened in England, the early part of the Industrial Revolution, is like people had to leave the countryside, like communities that their families had been in for hundreds, if not thousands of years, because of various economic conditions, and go to cities. So now they no longer live on land that they felt a connection to. In practice, most of them didn't actually own it because of English feudal system, but whatever. They felt like a deep connection to this land. There were graveyards stretching back 1,000 years with all their ancestors and stuff like that. You can go to the parish records at the church and see all of your extended family written there. And anyway, so they move into row houses built by the industrialists that all look the same and that they're renting. But that like maybe starts to feel a little bit like home. You try to build it up into a home. And then you leave that and you go to a factory, which feels even less like a thing. And you do all this work. And then the whole thing you laid out happens. And then the guy who owns the factory says, not only do you not deserve the spoils of the hunt, like, you're not actually my tribe. I've just allowed you to enter my territory, but I'm part of a different tribe. Fuck you. And it's just like every single possible layer of indignity all at once.
That was very well said. And that's exactly it. So the significance, back to the original point, this is what's lost in that whole process. And this is largely where we find ourselves today. And when you think about what has filled that void, what has filled that gap of significance, and historically it was it was just the church, right? That you could be a part of at least this. What would you call it? You're the one who've left your family countryside of graves for stretching back generations, and you go to this new place. But at least you can find this layer of the social layer of people at least believe what you would believe. It's a patch fix for a tribe, having a tribe, and at least you had that thing, right? And that would give you some significance, and it had some rituals. And even though the industrialist, you weren't a part of his tribe, at least you got your little tribe, right? And now that's gone. So what the heck do people do for significance? To me, there's just on a large scale, just no one is getting any of this nutrition. And I like to think of it like this. And it's hard because we've been so deep in this paradigm, but we don't think about it. We don't realize what's been lost. The way that's the best to understand this is if you were 3 generations removed from meat eating, you had no idea what meat eating was like. You heard about it, the people used to do it in the past, and you're full-blown vegetarian now. You're frail and weak and pathetic, but that's normal. That's the status quo. That's what everyone is. It's like, well, that's what we all are, right? And I feel like that's a good metaphor for where we are in terms of some of this social nutrition, this tribal nutrition, significance being one of them. And I feel like that's and why I'm focusing so much on this stuff, and why I'm focusing so much on the meta is like, what if you give back people that true meat that they're designed for, and it's just like a holy shit experience. Like, wow, I didn't realize I'm supposed to be having this. I'm supposed to feel extraordinary significance. I'm supposed to walk out my hut and be loved by 50 people, of which many of them might actually die for me on the hunt or something, right? To protect me. Like, that's all gone. So I'll just finish off that thought and I'll get you guys' last thoughts, but I want to go on to the next one, beyond significance. But to me, that seems like such an important piece of, I'm going to call it social nutrition now. It seems like the right word. I'm landing on the right word here. It seems like one of the most akin to meat eating that we don't have. What do you guys think? Okay, that probably wrapped it up anyway. So I'll go on to the next one. So the next major thing that you get from a tribe, again, that we have nothing of, is solidarity. So this comes from Sebastian Junger's book on tribes again. So he says here specifically about solidarity is that in times of crisis or conflict, people often come together and form strong bonds of solidarity. He cites examples such as soldiers in combat, who often form tight-knit groups that rely on each other for survival, and communities that come together in the aftermath of natural disasters or terrorist attacks. So immediately what comes to mind is we have an example of this on a macro scale with COVID. And I don't know if your experience was the same as mine, but I had absolutely zero solidarity with anyone for the most part with my particular view of things. And that was a very unnerving, vulnerable, exposed feeling. And again, if you're thinking in this in terms of social nutrition, this would be extraordinarily rare that any individual in a tribe for thousands of years would face some sort of thing like this alone. And the way I like to think of solidarity is, when you face a major challenge or an issue, you literally have behind you like lots of people that bring up a shield and build a solid wall that defends you, right? And modern people just face everything alone now. What's you guys' thoughts on that?
I mean, that definitely resonates for me with COVID. He didn't completely agree, mostly in that he just did the boomer thing. He was like, I mean, you're theoretically right, but I'm not going to do anything about it. But the only person who would even entertain anything I had to say was my dad. And I realized at one point that basically every conversation with him, I was just getting really angry and ranting because it was the only outlet I had to talk about any of this shit. And everything else, I was either afraid to talk about it because I just didn't, with coworkers I didn't know well or something like that, or knew I couldn't without getting in huge arguments. And it was pretty disastrous. I was not happy. first couple months were like fine-ish. I mean, they weren't great, but like it was early enough that it didn't. But like mid to late 2020 through sometime in 2021, I was like just really mad at the world all the time.
Well, he makes in Sebastian Junger in this book makes this really interesting case, which I know you've read, that if you don't have solidarity with people, that's actually where source of trauma comes from. Whenever you digest major crises and problems with the group behind you, solid behind you, then it doesn't lead to trauma. And he gives the example of PTSD with soldiers. I believe he gives the example of American soldiers who go back to zero solidarity when they get home. No one can understand their struggle, versus Israeli soldiers who go back to basically a culture because they're all part of. They all have to be in the military, I believe, as citizenship. So whenever they go back, there's always all these other people who understand what they went through and have perfect solidarity with them. When you go back home to America, and some people are throwing things at you, some people are with you, most people don't understand you. So there's the instances of PTSD with Israeli soldiers is like nothing, but with American soldiers is dramatic. And he says the reason is because they don't experience true solidarity. And if you think about what COVID was for a lot of people, I'm not suggesting it's like being in theater of combat, but the absence of solidarity is the generation of trauma, because it's like something you need to digest these events with the help of a social layer, or else your mind cannot do them properly, or maybe it judges itself incorrectly, gets in some form of like feedback loop cycles. It needs to reconcile what it went through with the social group, and if it can't, it leads to trauma. And I think for COVID, I think that was the case for a lot of people.
And it wasn't just a sense of lack of solidarity. It was also seeing others who had solidarity that was antithetical to yours, perhaps.
Right, which is almost akin
it's almost worse, right?
Yeah, it's actually like a form of like if they've got solidarity, and in a lot of ways they were threatening you, and you don't have solidarity. Yeah, it's like an army against you. So that's a big one. So we got no significance these days. We've got no solidarity. So going on to the next ones here. Give me just a second. So traditions. I roped this into, traditions were typically, all of you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but they're passing on usually Lindy methods, right? But wrapped up in interesting ways. But traditions around cooking and things like that. Like traditions are wrapping up, like they didn't have nutrition science back then, but they had traditions around food. And we see that problem now with, I see it all the time with mothers feeding, when they're pregnant, and then what they feed their children afterwards is horrific, and it's a form of child abuse. And they would be much better served if they just look back to the traditions that, their grandma or great grandma would have told them. We've broken traditions now, so we've broken the transmission of Lindy methods that have survived over time, and we find ourselves again alone, isolated, and no answers to anything of what we're doing or what we're going through. So what do you think in terms of the loss of traditions, how that's affecting us?
I mean, I know it's something that I have like not even consciously know it. Like this is like really interesting because it's actually like it's just indirect, like, hormonal, I'm sure, driven guidance from my brain in the aftermath of COVID, is like being much more involved in various smaller scale communities in my area. And like, I find myself increasingly appreciating the various things that sort of form the rhythm of those organizations throughout the year. So it's like I'm like actively seeking out adding a lot more tradition to my life than existed beforehand, in the aftermath. But like I didn't sit down and set out to do that. It's just like what I wanted to do. as
What
a
do you
result of.
what do you think is the hormonal nutrition that we're getting from traditions? So I'm trying to break it down in my head. We have traditions of methods that are passed down. We have traditions of cycles, seasons, and rituals. Would you rope in rituals, I guess, with traditions also?
Yeah,
Like
I think it's like sensory oxytocin, if that makes sense. So I know that's like primarily about feeling accepted by the group, but I think there's also like a like temporal and um, in some cases like sonic and visual piece too. Am I making sense? Like it grounds
yes,
you, right?
so,
Like the what you know. This has never actually been particularly big for me, but it is for a lot of people. Like watching the Fourth of July fireworks, right? It's like there's like a sense of uh,
well, it's a shared dopamine event if you think about it, right?
yeah, that's
Shared
true.
surprise, right? You're experiencing a non-expected, or you can't anticipate how these things are going to blow up in the sky, but every time it happens, it's a surprise, so you get dopamine from it. And I suspect shared dopamine is probably a thing, right? When people are aligned hormonally about that sort of stuff. I'm sure shared serotonin, like
Well, it's the
shared
shared
oxy,
goals, which is another one
right?
of the things that you listed.
Well, right. So we can get into that next. So shared goals. I was just gonna the shared goal of the tribe, right? That
Yeah,
is, you still there?
I'm here. Yeah.
Okay. You might just want to mute it while I'm just talking here. But so the shared goal is the next major piece. So we've had significance so far, solidarity, the traditions, which may or may not include rituals, because I want to go into rituals on its own. I feel like it's extraordinarily powerful, the nature of rituals. But shared goal seems to be the next big one. And I think we nailed it there with the shared goal will be shared dopaminergic targeting. And we know from, I've shared a lot about that, showing the monkey fairness study where the one monkey's getting cucumbers for pushing the button and then his buddy gets a grape and he's getting a better, he's doing the same actions because he presses the button too and gets a grape. And if there is one person, so I'm trying to get this logic right. Shared goal is good, but if other members of the tribe are allowed to have better goals, right? Or there's a variance of goals, you run into the problem of envy universally. And I think that's why one of the first stories in the Bible is about envy, Cain and Abel. So by having a shared goal and then that group possessive division of labor, you solve a lot of the problems that are in modern society because we have everyone gets different forms of blessing that makes us all envious, and our division of labor is a mess where we never feel like we're getting our proper due in what we're doing. So shared goal seems to be a huge one, and that makes sense in a tribal context because you're facing some sort of um, existential threat all the time. So the shared goal is we need to hunt mammoth every day or whatever, right? We need to hunt. We need to move the camp during the seasons. We need to, et cetera, right? Where the survival is the main goal of everybody and they're working towards it. So how do we get that day to day? Like most families don't even have a shared goal. Like a wife has different goals than the husband. So how do we get this?
I wonder if part of it is like something, so like a sort of an underlying uh, cofactor with a lot of these modernity problems is a reduction in risk. Um, and I feel like, you know, to take the
So
family example,
it's
if
like Dan.
everyone's,
I was just going to add this thing. It's like Daniel talked about that you need threat, right? Daniel, you were speaking about that the other day. Like maybe they'll never get it because they don't have threats. I can't remember what it was about. Maybe it was significance or solidarity, but I can't remember.
Yeah, I think it was solidarity that we were talking about in maybe in Bible study.
Yeah,
And
something.
without the threat, there's often low solidarity, and you need like some type of pressure to align people, and then the solidarity comes back.
Exactly. Sorry, Oliver, cut you off there, but go ahead. I just wanted to add that piece.
yeah, no, I mean, I think that's like a different phrasing of exactly what I'm talking about, right? Like if, you know, if the tribe or the family or whatever is starving, then like your wife's going to be completely aligned with you. Like, we need to get food for the kids. She's not going to be like, no, I need to go, keep up appearances with my friends. It's like, no, the kids are starving. Like, the only priority is, and, I think that's true with like, businesses that are right on the ragged edge. Like, everyone's pulling in the same direction. Once you get this like big corporation that's got tons of money flowing in, that's when you get, no 10-person startup has a DEI organization. Like, you just don't have time for it. Like, we need to generate incremental dollars.
Right.
But like, you got 100,000 employees, like, like some executive like just can't be bothered. Like, they've said no 5 times and they're just like, I don't really care. I'm still going to make it. And so, sure, go off and do that. And then,
that really elucidates why one of the only structures, tribal structures, that's providing a shared goal these days is unfortunately the corporation, right? Which is kind of sad, but outside of that, there's nothing, right? And I think, traditionally it might have been something like a church, but that's a bit more of the shared goal wouldn't be so specifically survival related; it'd be more spiritual related. But in the absence of that, the survival, the coalescing around a goal because of survival it's about the only thing is a corporation. And I think that's why it explains so much about the corporation is so attractive, or it's attracting so many people, like your typical feminists, like the career woman. It's the new tribe is the corporate structure. It has shared goals. It sometimes has solidarity, a little bit of significance, right? It's got a little bit of these pieces, but you can see the allure of it and why so many are pushing in that direction.
clear hierarchy.
Yep. And they try to have their traditions and whatnot. But anyways, it's kind of a sad state of affairs. But when you start to see the nature of tribes, you start to see that our current examples are portioned off, distilled, broken examples of them that exist, and the corporation is one of them. So let's go on to now the common enemy, right? So you have a shared goal and then a common enemy. Typical tribe would have just been Mother Nature, right? In a lot of ways, and that's what they not just Mother Nature, but I'm trying to describe this. The common enemy was Mother Nature, and they invented the animal deities and how to overcome that and bartering with the animal deities. But I don't want to get too complicated in that. But the common enemy is what really causes the solidarity. And again, about the only things that you'll see that has that these days is a corporation. What is your thoughts on that? I feel like this one's tough these days. Politics is really heavy. This is where that tribalism comes in a lot. They don't have, politics for the most part don't have very good shared goals, like even Democrats versus Republicans. But they're very big on the shared enemies, right? And I think that's what defines those larger macro tribes a lot more. Corporations, the enemy is competitors, bad clients, things like that. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I was going to bring up political groups, but like you're saying, that's a good point. They have enemy, they unite around enemies, but not really around shared goals. So it's a bit different than corporations have both sides. They have the competition, and then they have the goal within the organization.
Right. Yeah, so that one's pretty straightforward. And I think that's also why I was just thinking about that as one of the reasons why Bitcoin Twitter and Bitcoin is such an allure for people, is because it is a form of a decentralized tribe, at least a digital tribe, and it has a common enemy. And it tends to have it does have a shared goal, the ascension of Bitcoin completely. And, it has its traditions, it has its carnivorism, it has its solidarity. I was thinking about what happened with, what's his name, in Sweden or Norway, when he got sued by fake Satoshi. Anyways, I can't remember.
Hodl.
Yes, right. So, and significance. Yeah. So anyway, so that's a good example, I think, of the allure of the Bitcoin tribe. And it's very rare that you will find something that has a common enemy and a very strong shared goal, but it has that. And that's probably why it has such sticking power and the network's so strong.
Yeah, and running a meetup, like you see how excited people are to find their tribe, like to just be able to talk about the stuff that they have no solidarity about Bitcoin with people in their family or their existing friend group. So when they come to a meetup, a lot of times they're just really ecstatic to be able to talk with other Bitcoiners, because they've just been missing that.
Yeah, that's an amazing insight. And I'm just having a bit of an epiphany. Or, it's always been built into Tournament Mail, but I feel like it is. It's an important piece to, if you want to have some sort of a coherent tribal layer in anything that you're building. It's a really smart one to have, because you will get by nature people who, well, you got to be pretty intelligent to understand it, but they're looking for tribal cohesion. So if that is a piece of the allure to it, then you're going to be getting some pretty good people. Anyways, that was just a really good epiphany for me. So I'll go on to the last one here, and it's the nature of stories. And so all tribes tend to congregate around something, either a fire or something, a church. There's always a congregation point, and at the congregation point is usually stories. And in the case of church, it's a book, the Bible, with stories, and those stories teach moral lessons. Also, it comes with moral rules, but for a lot of the time, the moral rules get particularly when we go into tribes within civilization. And this is certainly what Jesus was dealing with, is that the rules become ways of oppressing and controlling, and the nature of the stories get poorly interpreted, and the spirit of the stories get forgotten. But that seems to be one of the biggest, and without that, it's hard for me to map the exact costs of that. And I think in a lot of ways, Hollywood replaced the church in terms of providing stories to the generations. So instead of congregating at a church, we would congregate at a theater, and we would watch, which is, I mean, it's amazing. Eventually, like, watch a story being played out in front of you and told to you, crafted for you, teaching you usually a moral lesson, right? That's what stories do. And I wonder if that, in a way, co-opted religious forms of moral stories. And, we've been essentially, and maybe that's why Hollywood is so successful at programming people, because we are tribally designed to receive moral teaching through the story medium. What do you guys think?
So is the idea, am I understanding right? You're saying the idea is that the proliferation of stories through different mediums basically pushed out some of our traditional and standard stories, and the power of those stories, whether it's the Bible or others. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, I think so. Because if you look at certainly the outcome over the last, say, 40 years, what has been the primary driver of people's moral teachings, it's almost always film, or this I relate to, I'm sure, tribal as well, is music. A lot of people listen to music, and they get their ways of acting and behaving through what's being discussed in music, whether it's to be angry about this thing or to love this thing, right? And that probably relates to stories were probably told in musical form at the various early forms. Should certainly have that with worship music, because these would have been, or before books, it would have been oral traditions. It's very likely, just like psalms, it would be sung to you, performed to you, to add to it, and then you throw it all together, and that's like get it all together in a movie, right? It's like combines all the mediums. But yeah, my perspective is that Hollywood and music has been responsible for the moral operating system of people the last 40 years. Just because just a more enticing version of our story machinery. Just like iPads, get the focus of dopamine over building something with your hands. Just whenever technology is created, it becomes a more enticing medium. And if you're focusing more attention on it, well, then you're going to become, especially in terms of stories, you're going to be programmed by whatever those stories are.
So would this, if it works this way, would this, do you think, have started in like the 20s, 30s, or more recently than that? I'm just trying to think of different types of the different mediums that we've had, and I mean, in the past, it seemed like at certain points in history, like a lot of the stories, it was all biblical stuff. Like the paintings are biblical, the stories are biblical. It's all rooted in that, and I don't know how much the medium changes have affected it, and how much is just people left the stories, and it just happens that we have other mediums now.
Right. Yeah, I think you're right in what you're saying. Why can't we have Netflix and movies and Hollywood, and all they do is biblical stories? Like whenever a new medium was discovered in history, it would all be religious, right? Whether it's symphonies or whatever we invented, it would still always remain biblical for the most part. Why did that change? And it's probably the disconnect between the medium and the stories being told. Again, is probably a fiat problem to some degree. And but regardless of how it occurs, we're certainly at that point where the stories being told through the medium are very different than the traditional stories throughout history.
Yeah, and this made me think of a movie from maybe the 40s that my family watched not that long ago, and in some ways it was like the modern ones that you would see made in 2022 or something like that, but in other ways it was different. So it wasn't a biblical story, but you could kind of see it had lessons or a point similar to if it were a biblical story. And it was like it was to build character or to build you up, whereas if it had been made yesterday, it would have been almost like to tear an existing structure down or something like that. It just felt very different.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, even those old stories, they'd still heavily influenced. I think the very nature of the story medium has been incredibly influenced by religion. And even I was just thinking of symphonies. There would have been like a lot of very specific, what would you call orchestral arrangements that would have been, dedicated to some biblical thing or whatever. But then there would be ones that would be devoted to like the nature or something, or some certain sense of beauty. But it's still touching on those same themes. And I think the same was with movies. But we've gotten to a point now, and I was just even thinking it wasn't even bad up until the 90s. I was thinking the movies I've been raised on, classic hero stories, etc.
Yeah,
But
I mean, the second golden age of Disney is mostly just taking really old stories and retelling them.
Yeah, exactly. But now, post 2008, with the whole woke world, super low interest rates, the stories are so warped and gnarled. They do not match anything in history. But anyways, that's a different topic for another time. But my point is that the original.
I wonder, to tie it actually back into this topic, I wonder if it's because, right, so there's the sort of conspiracy theory, but it aligns really well that, like, right when Occupy Wall Street was actually doing well and pointing out basically the Cantillon effect. They were not that sophisticated about it, but that's basically what they were pointing to. The incidence of like the words race and white and black in major publications goes through the roof.
Right, yeah.
And so I wonder if part of the reason our storytelling infrastructure has just like fallen off the deep end is because the prevailing narrative started being, we are not from the same tribe, we are from different tribes that are at war.
Right.
And so then, like, how can you tell stories in that context? Like, it's like there's something deep within us that is like, this is how we share tribal connection, and so it fucks with everything.
Yeah, that's a great insight. A thought comes to my mind. I don't know if it's exactly, but it's like particularly the New Testament started the trend of the Good Samaritan, right? And that type of affinity, at least for the other, for the out group, And now it's completely turned on its head, where it is a complete tension between all groups in terms of storytelling, and the idea of being the Good Samaritan is righteously considered wrong these days. So if you're a group to white people or whatever, it's very fine to leave that guy on the road, and that's like a celebrated story now. But anyways, that's sort of probably getting off track there. But so that goes over the main thing. So if you are to have a good life these days, this is the ultimate purpose of studying this. This is why I look at things and call it the meta. So the meta is everything I described, and then there's what we currently have, which is garbage. Right? We were falling way off the mark on all these things. So there's no easy answer, obviously, to how to get these things. But where I kind of wanted to go with it, I think we've covered everything in terms of describing everything. The church is struggling in restoring its typical tribal reunification. It's having problems with this current paradigm. There's nothing that seems to be rising in its place. What do you guys see in terms of the lay of the land? What do you see in terms of how things go forward in this tribalist paradigm?
I mean, a lot of us are looking digitally, right? We're looking to find our tribe out there on the internet when we're, as opposed to
the only solution in the absence of like core needs is to build them yourself. And this is actually one of my sort of like great hopes around the woke movement, is that it's fundamentally a destructive, not a constructive movement.
Right.
They're tearing things down. They're like, that's bad, and that's bad, and that's bad, and that's bad. But like, they're not building anything.
Yeah, that's a good insight. Well, I guess that would then we could parlay that into obviously what we're doing with Tournament Mail, because that's the purpose of this, and I think it's the attraction that you guys originally have for it. But I think it's really important to emphasize how screwed up we are, how far off the mark we are in terms of that social nutrition. I sometimes, especially for children, right? I know Daniel has children. You guys will be having children, but without an intact tribe, without an intact culture, without these traditions, without everything we're talking about, without the proper moral stories, the proper shared goal, kids are the most vulnerable right now out of anyone. Because even my youth, there was still 80s and 90s, there were still some intact versions of this, right? But now it's utterly gone. I cannot describe how. Maybe it's a bit different for Daniel, and he has a nice setting there. I think it's in Ohio, and you have a bit of a tight knit community. But where I live, it's nothing. It is absolute antagonism with everyone around you. And I don't know what it is, but everyone I meet is woke, and that's a new tribe. That's that right there, the tear everything down tribe. They're this weird tribe that's never really existed in this strange form that it doesn't want its own territory, wants to destroy its own territory and everyone else's territory. It's very weird. So it to me, like the once you learn this, the impetus is really for children. I think I could survive in this broken wasteland, and I'm quite used to being isolated, but I think I had a good youth, and that's maybe the only reason I can handle it. But I'm not so sure my kids can. I'm not so sure that, like, I'm already seeing 14 to 18-year-old kids growing up in this paradigm, and it's really tragic what's happening to them. They have no sense of significance, no solidarity, zero traditions. They have no idea how to do anything, no methods passed down. They have no shared goal. They don't know what they're doing, what they want to do. They don't even have a common enemy. It's just nothingness, right? And there's no moral teaching in their stories, and they're just very, very confused. And I think why I want to rebuild a tribe so badly is to restore the infrastructure for my children. But I know I have to build it first for myself. So, any thoughts on that? Quick.
I'm just really fortunate because I have a lot of the stuff already. Just because I guess it's largely because of family, like number of siblings, and we're all within 45 minutes of each other. So there's that. But even in that situation, there's still some gaps that I see, as in when you have different age ranges, like not everybody lines up. So for some kids, they don't really have equivalent peers. So at least they have older and younger cousins, aunts and uncles and stuff like that. So it's a pretty good situation for me overall, but I still see some of the gaps.
Yeah, that's really good. Well, I'm trying to just think where to go with this now. I wouldn't mind, for the listeners, I just want to let you guys know that this meta study and the members here talking, they're part of what I'm trying to build as a digital tribe. That's why I think about this stuff so much. And what I want to explore quickly, it won't take much time because we're over the hour, but I wanted to touch on this because I think about all these things as we've just discussed in terms of what I'm building in a tournament mail, but it's making me think, why did I have to call it tournament mail, or why did that have to be the base that I built it on to actually get the tribe working? And that's just what I want to talk about quick, is that I feel like at the very core of this, and it's one of the reasons, like, why is Christianity, which is so lindy and one of the best tribal reunification software that has been laid on atop society that's been working for so long, why is it struggling so badly right here? And the conclusion I keep coming to is that the base, before the, call it the social, tribal, biblical layer, there's a layer below of God's reality that is required for that one to even work right, and that is the nature of masculine order. When you no longer have masculine men, the Bible cannot be interpreted right. Any tribe will descend into the effeminate. It'll become gynocentric very quickly. And tribes cannot exist, in my opinion, sustainably unless they have masculine order. So I've always thought there's a base layer before Christianity. There's a base layer before religion that is out of whack these days. Maybe it's the food, maybe it's the water, maybe it's the shitty stories on Hollywood, maybe it's entirely fiat. But the base layer is broken, and we don't have masculine men. And by masculine men, I mean territorial men. We don't have men who are territorial. They don't, oh, you want to inject me with something and inject my kids and come in my house? And, well, okay, fine, I guess. Oh, you've reasoned with me. Okay, that makes sense. Like, there's no territorial instinct whatsoever in modern men for whatever reason. That's a different topic. But I feel like you need to restore the territorial men, because they're the ones who will have the common enemy, the shared goal, right? They will have solidarity with the other. From there, you can actually start building the tribe. And that's why I call it tournament mail. And I only think, that tournament-minded men, in terms of that concept in reproductive biology about tournament versus pair bonders, it has to be tournament-style men that put this together. And it almost seems strange to me, like, oh, I'm building a tribe. Like, who does that? But it's like, well, if I don't build it, and if you guys don't build it with me, who the fuck's going to build it? I'm sitting here waiting around. There's the public school down the road. There's the effeminate church down there. There's the fucking corporation. I can go to the theater and watch my moral lessons. Like, I'm surrounded by the broken tribal landscape, and there's no option. There's no little secret society I can go into, some hidden back door and be like, yeah, we're tired of this shit, and we're blah blah blah. There's no speakeasies. There's no nothing. There's nothing but the broken woke world. So if I don't build it, I don't think it just doesn't exist. I don't know what to look forward to every day, because none of my neighbors line up with me. Nothing lines up with me. So that's why I feel, and it's because I rarely ever meet masculine men. And maybe you guys experience the same thing. When you finally meet a masculine guy, it's like, okay, we're on the same page. So I feel like it's masculine men, like true masculinity, which is territorial at the core, is how it's built. And that's why tournament mail is called the way it is. And that, to me, is what the foundation is. What do you guys think on that?
It's to me, it's so important.
I just keep going back to something. I was watching a YouTube video recently about the Indo-European Koreos, which was the youth cohort, basically. When they were like 16 to 18, a group of youths would all be essentially forced to go out and live on their own. And there was a whole bunch of ritual around it. And then afterwards, they could come back as men of the tribe. And there's a couple interesting things there. Like sometimes they didn't come back. Like sometimes they were so successful in like hunting and raiding other tribes, and like the tribes would start offering them tribute that they just make their own tribe. But the video also talked about how like the men of the tribe preserved these traditions and then passed them on to their sons because, and this is like the phrase that stuck in my head, is like, because in a very real sense, the men of the tribe were the tribe. They could take new women, they could conquer new lands, they could make more children. But if the men of the tribe die, the tribe dies.
Totally.
And I think that's completely in line.
And you could, I'm probably after a longer discussion, we could break that down into the nature of territory and how it's maintained, right? But James, can you hear me? You just messaged me. Yeah, go ahead, James.
Yeah, no, there's a bit of lag on my end here. I was just saying, it is incredibly important when you say it's so rare to kind of meet truly masculine men in the real world. Like certainly in my social sphere, it's something that is missing and abundantly clear that it's missing. And one thing I didn't realize that I kind of really needed to have in my life to kind of get some sense of balance back, until it was pointed out that it was missing. So, yeah.
Amazing. That's awesome to hear, man. How about you, Daniel? I think you unmuted there. You had something to say.
No, I don't think so. I one thing that occurs to me, like it can be kind of tricky. Like you're talking about meeting people and trying to assess who you're meeting, and sometimes it can be tricky to know what you're looking at. Like there's a lot of trappings of masculinity, I guess, and it reminds me of a meme picture of like a bunch of guys with beards, and it's like the masculine bearded men, but they clearly aren't masculine. And then it's some old school Hollywood clean shaven guys, and it's like comparing the two, and you have sort of the trappings of masculinity without the real deal. And there's a lot of that going on.
That's why I feel it's so important when I'm referring to masculinity, but it's so important to define it as tournament. I feel like tournament is, when you understand tournament species, that is the very source of masculinity. I cannot understand masculinity any other way. I hear it all the time talked about, and I'm like, you guys are just talking about like a stern form of pair bonding, right? But anyways, that's a different discussion, and we've talked about that a lot, and I have lots of threads on that. But the last thing I wanted to run through, so just to wrap this up with how we've designed Tournament Mail. So I just want you guys to get thinking about these things, because it's something I've always wanted to do a course on. But think of how can you, so in the way that we structure Frameform and our meetings, and how can you give another member more significance? Quickly off the top of your head, what do you think is a good way to do that? So starting with the first one, significance.
Allow them to share their experiences that might influence and improve your life.
Right. Let them share their strengths and accept it into your life, which you never get anywhere these days. Strengths are almost resoundingly taken as some form of a threat to everyone around you. So the next one, how do you get solidarity?
Shared goals are shared set of goals, roughly orbiting around the same factors. And I think in Tournament Mail, we're all going after somewhat the same things. Some people might be more focused on family. Some people might be more focused on, their professional life. But ultimately, we're all kind of going after that same kind of recipe.
Well, that blends into my next question. So what do you think that shared goal is, if you could describe it in one word? I would say sovereignty, but I don't like using that word because it's too complex. But I would say that it probably is that. And if you actually probably think about every tribe in history, the goal is sovereignty, right? It might be a utopian ideal, but it's what you pursue. Does that sound about right, guys? I'm just trying to get this from my own
Yeah, agreed, 100%.
And I think, again, I've described sovereignty in a very specific way. I think sovereignty is best described as being unpossessable. So whatever your territory is, it's that no one else can possess pieces of it, whether it's your kids, whether it's your wife's mind, whether, right? And it's all about being unpossessable. Your money being unpossessable, its value cannot be devalued through inflation. It cannot be directly stolen through banking, right? So if you want an unpossessable piece of territory you need Bitcoin, for instance, right? But it's really using the theme of that in everything that you do: an unpossessable mind, an unpossessable body, a body not being possessed by Nabisco or, you know what I mean, Cadbury, or whatever study was funded to support the idea that seed oils are healthy, right? We're unpossessable by those ideas, and it does not manifest on our body, right? So it's all about the goal of being like resoundingly unpossessable in our territory as much as possible. Okay, I just want to do this last two. So the common enemy, what would you say the common enemy is of Tournament Mail?
I mean, I posed this in the group the other week, and I don't have a good answer. I think there's like an amorphous common enemy, which is like sort of like all the people trying to take that from us. But I think it's hard to. I don't think we've quite pinned down like what that looks like viscerally.
Well, if you take just riffing here on Christianity, the entity that is the enemy is Satan. And in a lot of ways, how does that manifest on the earth? It is, possession of your body, right? Like the alcoholic who can't stop drinking, or the porn addict. My hand, I can't control it. Cut off my hand, pluck out my eye, cut out my tongue, because these things can be controlled by a nefarious enemy. And I think that is actually the same enemy of us. It is actual true sovereignty over the self, or the thing that stops that. Like, you can give it a name, but it's the thing that makes you not have sovereignty over yourself, right? That is the enemy. That might be too broad, but I feel like the enemy is, I don't know how to explain it well, but I think it's right. And what we're working with is fighting that enemy every day with the rituals and the things and the cycles and what we do in the group. Okay, and the last one is, if this is to be a tribe, what are the stories? What are the moral stories that will be at the center? And do they need to be created? Or do they exist already?
I will say in most of the origin stories of various like ancient civilizations, the structure comes first and then the stories come after. Like even like there will often be the mythical structure giving ruler and then the mythical story giving ruler. Right? So like the first Roman king was Romulus. And Romulus like created the city of Rome in a very real sense. And then the second king was Numa, and Numa created the Roman religion. And so I think part of what we're seeing with Tournament now, it's like in very nascent stages, but we're already creating some of the stories. There's like ways we talk about dopamine. I'm trying to think, there are other things, and I'm not even sure what they are yet. Or like inside the group, there's like a shared vocabulary that's starting to be built up, and then over time, the shared vocabulary will become a shared set of stories, and the stories will gain depth and complexity over time. I think we also, because we exist in a broader cultural context, sort of graft on other stories. But in terms of like the tribe's personal stories, I think they're sort of not yet present and not necessarily something that you can like just sit down and write.
That was an amazing answer. It's got my wheels turning a lot. Well, that seems like a really good note to end it on. That was awesome, and that's that final piece there is going to be a big thing that we're going to have to solve long term. So it's good to leave on that note. But any final thoughts, gents, and we'll wrap it up.
No, this was good. It's great to discuss these things. Open format.
Yeah, for sure, James. Amazing, gents. Well, I appreciate everybody contributing. That was awesome. So we'll be doing this next week on a different topic. So until then, chat with you guys later. I'll see you in the group.